What if the biggest threat to Iran right now isn't America, isn't Israel, but its own mountains? Something is happening in western Iran that almost nobody outside the region is watching, and it could change everything. Before we go further, if you want to actually understand what's unfolding here instead of just scrolling past another headline, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells me you want more videos like this. Subscribe if you're new, and send this to one person who still thinks Iran is only fighting America. They need to see this too. Picture this. While the entire world's cameras are pointed at Tehran, watching a massive funeral for an assassinated leader, watching crowds chant and cry and wave flags, something else is happening 200 miles away. In the mountains near the Iraqi border, armed men are moving through valleys and ridgelines. They are not random smugglers. They are not bandits. They are trained fighters, and they are hitting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps again and again in places Iran always insisted it fully controlled. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation from some anonymous account online. Human rights groups tracking the region, along with independent journalists, have confirmed a wave of deadly clashes stretching across multiple provinces in western Iran. And the timing could not be worse for Tehran. Let's slow down and understand who these fighters actually are, because this detail changes how you see the entire story. These are Kurdish opposition fighters. Kurds are one of the largest ethnic groups in Iran, concentrated mostly in the western provinces near Iraq. For decades, various Kurdish political parties have pushed for more rights, more autonomy, and in some cases, the total collapse of the regime in Tehran. Iran has always responded the same way: crackdowns, executions, and constant surveillance of Kurdish towns and cities. But something shifted this year. Back in February, a war broke out involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. Missiles flew, airstrikes hit nuclear sites, and Iran's military took a beating it had never experienced before. In the middle of all that chaos, several major Kurdish opposition parties, groups that had spent decades arguing and competing with each other, suddenly started working together. They formed a coalition with one shared goal: to end the regime's grip on power and finally win real self-rule for Kurdish areas. At first, this coalition moved carefully. Early reports claimed thousands of Kurdish fighters had already launched a ground invasion into Iran. It turned out to be false. The parties themselves denied it. Officials in Iraq's Kurdish region confirmed that not a single fighter had crossed the border at that point. Iran called the whole story fake news designed to stir panic. For weeks after that, the coalition held back, worried that moving too fast could get their fighters slaughtered before the moment was right. Then Iran kept striking Kurdish camps anyway. Drones and missiles hit Kurdish opposition bases inside Iraq month after month, even during supposed ceasefire periods. Fighters died. Civilians got hurt. And slowly that restraint started to crack. By the end of June, it cracked completely. On the night of June 27th, Iranian forces opened fire with heavy weapons on fighters from one of the coalition groups near the towns of Mahabad and Piran Shar. The battle lasted hours. When it ended, 4 fighters were dead, 2 women and 2 men. Iran claimed it had killed 6. Nobody outside could confirm either number for certain, but the fight itself was very real. 2 days later, a brand new group nobody had heard of before, calling itself Son of Hope, carried out its first attack. Not in some remote mountain pass, but inside a city. 2 IRGC-linked men were shot dead outside their own homes in the town of Pave. Think about what that means. This wasn't a border skirmish anymore. This was someone walking straight into a town and striking a target while the man was standing at his own front door. Then came July 1st, the deadliest night of the entire wave. A vehicle carrying 6 fighters from one of the biggest Kurdish parties was ambushed near a village called Kezkapan. According to the party's own statement, these men were not even on a combat mission. They were doing political organizing work. All 6 were killed. Iranian state media reported only 5 deaths and left one name out entirely: a man believed to have been quietly running underground networks deep inside Iranian cities. That single missing name tells you something important. Iran may not have wanted the world to know exactly how far this man's connections actually reached. The violence didn't stop there. In the same window, police officers were killed at checkpoints in 2 more towns. And in one of those attacks, a 3-year-old girl was caught in the gunfire. Independent researchers, tracking every confirmed death across this 2-week period, counted at least 21 people killed. The count included 7 Iranian security personnel and 14 Kurdish fighters, with some estimates going higher once disputed claims are added in. Analysts who study this region are calling it the deadliest clash between Tehran and Kurdish opposition forces in over a decade. One Kurdish community leader put it simply when speaking to reporters: "This is not routine border friction anymore. This looks like real operations happening deep inside the country." And he pointed to something crucial: months of accumulated anger after hundreds of Iranian strikes on Kurdish camps and communities. These were strikes that never really stopped, ceasefire or no ceasefire. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting. because Iran's strategy against this insurgency has a serious flaw baked right into it. If you're finding this useful, do me a small favor. Pause for 2 seconds, tap that like button. And if you're watching on your phone, screenshot this exact moment and share it in your group chat. Somebody in your circle needs to see this story. Let's keep going. Iran's answer to this uprising has mostly been airstrikes on Kurdish camps across the border inside Iraq. Drones, missiles, hundreds of them fired since February. The idea is simple: cut off the fighters before they can cross back into Iran. But there's a problem. The most experienced, most dangerous fighters in these coalition groups are not sitting around in easy-to-hit camps. They live and operate inside cave systems and mountain networks built up over literal decades of prior conflict. This is the same kind of terrain where an American fighter jet crew once had to eject and hide during an earlier part of this war. They were navigating tunnels that had existed for years already. Drones and jets are simply not built to erase an enemy hidden deep inside solid rock. So Iran keeps burning through its drone stockpile, hitting targets it can't actually destroy, while the real command structure sits mostly untouched. And the terrain itself is doing something else, too. It's making Iran's own military look weak. These mountains rise past 10,000 feet with narrow gorges that funnel any vehicle onto a single exposed road. Iran's aging helicopters struggle to even operate properly at that altitude. Armored convoys get stuck on single routes with nowhere to turn if they're ambushed. Meanwhile, the fighters defending this land have literally spent their whole lives learning every ridge, every hiding spot, every escape route. Iran is fighting on ground its own soldiers barely understand, against people who know it like their own home, because it is their home. This coalition isn't one single army either. It's actually 5 separate groups, each bringing something different to the table. One group is considered the most battle-hardened of them all, operating for over 2 decades with small infiltration teams that strike at night. They vanish before Iranian forces can respond, and notably, a large number of their fighters are women. Another group focuses less on direct combat and more on quiet intelligence networks hidden inside major Kurdish cities. This is exactly the kind of underground presence connected to that missing name from the July 1st ambush. A third group has spent years running planned strikes against military infrastructure. 2 more coalition partners bring decades of institutional experience along this same stretch of border. Here's the catch, though. Researchers studying this exact 2-week period found no solid evidence that these 5 groups are working under one shared command. It looks less like a single coordinated offensive and more like 5 separate movements, each one independently reaching a breaking point around the same time. Each one is striking back in its own way. There's also a technical reason Iran seems to be struggling so badly to detect this insurgency. Back in the opening weeks of this year's war, American and Israeli strikes wiped out huge stretches of Iran's radar systems and command infrastructure. This included sites that used to help monitor exactly this kind of Kurdish movement across the border. Those systems never got properly rebuilt. Whether that gap was intentional or just an accidental side effect of a much bigger bombing campaign is hard to say. But in either way, Iran's eyes on this specific corridor have gone dark at the worst possible moment for the regime. There have also been persistent, credible reports throughout this war about the United States and Israel weighing more direct support for these Kurdish factions. Early on, America's own president publicly said he wanted to see Kurdish forces succeed against the regime. Whether real material support is flowing to these groups right now remains genuinely unclear from the outside. What is clear is that if any kind of outside surveillance support were being provided, it would completely change the odds. Even something as simple as tracking Iranian troop movements from above would change things for fighters who already know this terrain better than anyone. Meanwhile, Iran's own military leadership is not acting like an organization in control. The head of the Revolutionary Guards made a rare public appearance recently, his first since the war began. He showed up wearing a plain cap, surrounded by casual security instead of the formal escort someone of his rank would normally have. That is not the body language of a confident commander. That is the body language of a man who knows his own safety is genuinely at risk. And this insurgency is exploding at the exact moment Iran's top leadership is at its most fractured. The country's new supreme leader hasn't appeared in public even once since his predecessor was killed months ago. He communicates only through written messages, specifically because of a serious, publicly acknowledged assassination threat against him. Stack that on top of an active uprising across multiple provinces, on top of an unresolved ceasefire with the United States, on top of a nationally broadcast funeral that was supposed to show unity, but reportedly drew quiet indifference from large parts of the population. You start to see a regime stretched far thinner than it wants anyone to notice. There's also a diplomatic tangle here worth understanding. Turkey has strongly opposed any outside power arming these Kurdish groups. This is because one of the key coalition parties has historic ties to a Kurdish movement Turkey has fought inside its own borders for decades. That opposition reportedly played a real role in scaling back earlier plans for direct American support. even after public statements suggesting otherwise. It's a genuinely messy situation, because any outside power backing this insurgency risks damaging its relationship with a major regional ally. If you've made it this far, that tells me you actually care about understanding what's really happening in the world instead of just watching headlines. So do this for me. Comment one word right now, just the word mountains, so I know how many of you are still here. It helps this video reach more people who need to see the real story. Now let's zoom out, because none of this is happening in isolation. Iran is currently juggling several enormous problems at once. There's a fragile ceasefire agreement with the United States. This gave both sides 60 days to negotiate a lasting deal, a window that runs out in mid-August. Iran has already told international officials it plans to start charging fees on ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz once that window closes. This is a move the United States has flatly rejected, insisting the strait stays free for everyone. Formal talks over that dispute were only set to properly begin once Iran's funeral proceedings wrapped up. So picture the position Iran's government is actually in right now. It's trying to hold together a shaky truce with Washington. It's staring down a serious dispute over one of the most valuable shipping routes on the planet. It's staging a massive funeral meant to project strength and unity to its own people and the world. And now, on top of all of that, it's fighting a spreading insurgency along its own western border. The insurgency is led by fighters who understand that terrain better than the regime's own soldiers ever will. That is an extraordinary amount of pressure for any government to hold together at once, especially one already showing cracks at the top. And Iran isn't the only flashpoint the world is quietly watching either. Global attention is divided. Around the same time, North Korea's leader was personally overseeing weapons tests on a massive new missile destroyer. He was watching it fire cruise missiles believed capable of carrying nuclear warheads. It's a reminder of the global situation. Each of these dangerous situations develops all at once, pulling attention and resources in different directions on separate clocks. So where does that leave the mountains of western Iran right now? A coalition of determined fighters is operating on terrain that neutralizes technology. They have killed a confirmed number of Iranian security personnel across multiple provinces in just 2 weeks. Iran's response, hundreds of airstrikes on camps across the border, has barely slowed them down. Iran's top general is making rare appearances in disguise rather than confidence. Every piece of this is unfolding amid a fragile truce. There is a looming shipping dispute and a leadership vacuum that shows no sign of ending soon. Nobody can say for certain whether this is the beginning of something much bigger, a genuine unraveling of Iran's grip on its western territory, or whether it eventually settles back into the kind of on and off border violence that has defined this relationship for generations. Some analysts point to the high number of Kurdish casualties as proof this movement can't sustain itself for long. Others point to the sheer spread of it, 3 provinces, 5 separate groups, all erupting within the same narrow window. This may be proof that something genuinely different is happening this time. What nobody can dispute is the list of names. Karo Hormuziari, Fardin Changizi, Mohammed Kaki, Abdullah Mohammedpour, Tuana Osmani, Mohammed Amin Bayazidi. These are real people, confirmed dead, verified by human rights groups working carefully to separate fact from propaganda. Their names represent the actual human cost sitting underneath every strategic analysis about drones, terrain, and coalitions. Whatever happens next in these mountains, whether it becomes the spark that finally cracks the regime's control or just another chapter, the people actually living through it, on every side of every checkpoint, are the ones carrying the real weight of this fight. And right now, while the rest of the world is distracted by funerals and diplomatic deadlines, that fight is continuing quietly. It is happening in the mountains, almost completely unwatched, and very much still happening. If this video actually taught you something today, don't just scroll away silently. Type the word Kurdistan in the comments right now, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next update on this story, and share this with someone who needs to understand what's really going on in Iran beyond the headlines. That's how this channel grows, and that's how more people finally see the truth.